Hundreds of protesters have rallied in Tokyo calling for the removal of U.S. military bases from the island prefecture of Okinawa. The demonstration marked last year's murder of a Japanese woman by a U.S. Marine in Okinawa. The protesters expressed their outrage over the murder that took place in April 2016. Back then, the victim, a 20-year-old office worker who worked at the base, was murdered on her way home. Later, U.S. Marine Kenneth Franklin Gatson admitted to striking her in the head, stabbing and raping her. The case triggered mass protests across Japan. The U.S. military personnel have a history of crimes against Japanese civilians. One of the most high-profile cases was the 1995 abduction and rape of a 12-year-old girl by 3 servicemen from the U.S. base in Okinawa. The infamous crimes have led Japanese officials to demand removal of U.S. bases from urban areas. Activist and political commentator Matt Florence joins us from Oxford. Mr. Florence, welcome to the program. How do you perceive the protests that are taking place in Okinawa? What's apparent is that the wounds of the Okinawans haven't healed yet.
Well, before I go into actually why people are horrified by this, the ordinary Japanese, it's quite amazing how huge these demonstrations are. But the reason for that is the Americans have ticked off both sides of the Japanese political spectrum. They've ticked off the Japanese nationalists who of course don't like having a military base of a country that conquered them on their land, and the left wing of the Japanese political spectrum who don't want to be affiliated with American imperialism. And there are other reasons, of course. WikiLeaks has always put out cables about how the United States has spied on its allies, most famously Germany. So I wouldn't be surprised if Japan was equally scared that they themselves are being spied on by the Americans. The Americans, of course, they have a history of spying on their neighbors, and they also have a very terrible history when it comes to prostitution in Asia with their American soldiers. Japan, of course, had their comfort women, but during the Korean War and World War II and Vietnam, the Americans, they would use prostitution as a way of trying to keep their soldiers in line. Another thing to talk about this is it's not only the murder that happened, but that American soldiers, when they commit these crimes overseas, usually get a slap on the wrist. This is most famously shown during the Maiwand district massacres in Iraq, in which American soldiers were cutting off people's fingers, the fingers of the people they killed, as trophies. In one case, there was a soldier called Andrew Holmes who shot and killed a 15-year-old boy and stripped the body naked and posed with it. And now, these massacres happen in any war, but what's really horrific about this is the way that the authorities treated it. They did send him to jail, but they let him out on good behavior after only a few years. He didn't, not nearly enough for somebody who murdered multiple people, including children, to get out on good behavior is disgusting. And, with another side of WikiLeaks we've seen is they've exposed how the United States has treated people in Iraq, most infamously Chelsea Manning's leak, where they showed the massacre in 2006, where an Apache helicopter was gunning down civilians. But the pilot of that helicopter is out free. The pilot of the helicopter that committed those massacres is not in jail. And this would have been hidden from the public if it wasn't for the leaks. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were many more horrific atrocities committed against Japanese people by American soldiers that we just aren't hearing. But maybe we might hear about them soon if somebody in the American military is brave enough to leak it.
Thank you very much, Matt Florence, joining us from Oxford.